We think today's world is rough, but history shows people once lived through punishments that pushed human cruelty to its limits. These methods were real, and they were shocking. Let's uncover the 20 worst punishments in history. Let's start with number 20. Roman parricides faced poena culae. In Roman law, different forms of murder carried distinct punishments, and the severity of the punishment depended on the nature of the crime. Among these, parricide, the act of killing one's own parent or parents, was considered one of the most heinous crimes. Those convicted of this gruesome act faced the terrifying punishment known as poena culae. The ritual of poena culae was an exceptionally cruel and unusual form of capital punishment. When a person was found guilty of parricide, their fate was sealed. This gruesome execution began with a merciless flogging, which would already be enough to terrify most people. But the worst was yet to come. The condemned individual was then subjected to a series of horrifying steps. First, a wolf skin bag was placed over their head, robbing them of sight and perhaps symbolizing the cruelty of their act. They were then forced to wear wooden sole clogs, making movement painful and arduous. But here's where it becomes truly macabre. The convicted parricide was tied into an ox leather sack, along with a disturbing menagerie of animals: a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. These animals weren't there as companions, they were instruments of torment. Now sewn into this grotesque sack, the condemned person was taken to a river or sea, carried by black oxen, and ultimately thrown into the water to meet their gruesome end through drowning. The animals inside the sack would likely contribute to the horror as well. Interestingly, poena culae was rarely employed as a form of punishment. Roman biographer Suetonius noted that it was primarily those who confessed to parricide who were subjected to this terrifying fate. In 118 CE, Emperor Hadrian allowed for poena culae to be substituted with another gruesome punishment: being thrown to wild beasts. Just a century later, this exceptionally cruel method was considered obsolete and thankfully abandoned. So if you think modern justice is harsh, remember the horrifying history of poena culae, a punishment as bizarre as it was brutal. The next is number 19, drawing and quartering. You're about to experience a punishment so brutal and horrifying that it's almost beyond belief. Drawing and quartering was a method of execution that came into gruesome practice in 13th century England and remained in use until 1867, reserved exclusively for those convicted of treason. It all began with drawing, which involved tying the condemned person to a horse and dragging them to the gallows. While hanging was often part of the process, it was by no means the end of their torment. Those sentenced to this horrifying fate might also face disembowelment or beheading. But the true horror lay in the quartering, the second part of this gruesome punishment. The condemned person's body was literally torn apart. Their limbs were tied to different horses, each urged to run in opposite directions. The result was a grotesque and horrifying spectacle. To serve as a macabre warning to others, the four quarters of the person's body were often displayed in different parts of the city. Hours of research went into creating this content, so please do us a favor and subscribe now. Let's move to the next number, number 18, Ling Chi. Ling Chi, also known as slow slicing or death by 1,000 cuts, was a method of torturous execution practiced in ancient China. This punishment was a protracted and agonizing process that spanned centuries, with its use dating back to as early as the 10th century. Fortunately, it was finally banned in 1905. The condemned person was tied to a post, and the excruciating process began. Their tormentors would methodically remove bits of skin and limbs one by one, inflicting incredible pain with each cut. The ordeal usually culminated in a final cut to the heart or decapitation. Imagine the horror of enduring this slow, drawn-out death sentence. The next is number 17, cropping of ears. This brutal penalty involved precisely what the name suggests: the removal of a person's ears as a form of retribution. In less severe cases, a variation of this gruesome practice was applied. Rather than complete ear removal, the ears of the convicted were sometimes nailed to a pillory for an agonizing period. Most chillingly, this punishment often didn't claim the lives of the condemned. Instead, it left them with lasting scars, both physical and psychological. Infections resulting from the wounds could lead to an excruciating death. Let's move to number 16. Death by boiling. Our next stop on this harrowing list takes us to an era where people played with not only their food, but with the lives of the condemned. The practice of boiling individuals alive. While today, boiling is a method reserved for cooking shellfish, centuries ago it was chillingly common across the continents of Europe and Asia. The process was as excruciating as it sounds. The condemned was stripped of their dignity and clothing, then placed in a cauldron or vat filled with boiling liquid, typically water, oil, or even tar. Imagine, if you will, the agony of being slowly cooked alive. In some cases, the offender was lowered into a vessel with initially cool liquid and then subjected to an agonizing rise in temperature. Shockingly, historical records from the reign of England's King Henry VIII show that some individuals endured up to 2 hours of this torment before finally succumbing to death. The origins of this horrific punishment can be traced back to the cruel reign of Emperor Nero in ancient Rome, where Christians were often the victims. In the 16th century, King Henry VIII of England went so far as to pass an act that deemed poisoning a crime punishable by boiling. Perhaps it was his own fear of poisoning that led to this gruesome decree. Thankfully, in the wake of Henry's death, his son, Edward VI, recognized the need to put an end to such barbaric practices, signaling the beginning of the end for these horrors. Here comes number 15. Sawed in half. This nightmarish fate was inflicted upon unfortunate souls in various parts of the world, including the Roman Empire, Spain, and regions of Asia. The premise is as gruesome as it sounds. The condemned individual faced a gruesome dismemberment, often in a public spectacle designed to send a horrifying message to onlookers. This brutal method of execution was a literal dissection of a living person. This horrifying practice involved the slow and agonizing removal of a person's internal organs while they were still alive, ultimately leading to their death. The next one is number 14, crushed under an elephant. This gruesome practice was disturbingly popular in ancient India and several other regions of Southeast Asia. The power and size of elephants made them perfect instruments of death in this gruesome public spectacle. The process was as follows. Convicts were placed beneath the massive feet of trained elephants, with the intention of delivering a swift and brutal death. However, the level of cruelty could vary. In some cases, the elephants were trained to prolong the agony, inflicting a slow and torturous demise. Imagine the sheer horror of witnessing this gruesome event, as the world's largest land mammal was weaponized to carry out these executions. The sight of a helpless individual being trampled by the elephant's immense weight is enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. It's worth noting that this method of execution was most common in areas where elephants were native, primarily in South and Southeast Asia. Human cruelty knows no bounds, even towards majestic creatures like elephants trained for this brutal purpose. Let's move to number 13, the brazen bull. Hold your breath, because we're about to explore one of the most sadistic and diabolical creations in the annals of human history, the brazen bull, also known as the Sicilian bull. This nightmarish device was conceived by the ancient Greeks, specifically by the tyrant King Phalaris of Sicily in the 6th century BCE. His cruel reputation seems to have known no bounds, and he sought to invent a punishment that would match his sinister desires. The brazen bull was a bronze statue constructed in the shape and size of an actual bull. The condemned person would be locked inside this gruesome contraption. A fire would then be set beneath the bull, heating the bronze until the person inside was literally roasted alive. If this alone wasn't horrifying enough, the device included a macabre mechanism that transformed the anguished screams of the victim into eerie bellowing sounds reminiscent of a raging bull. The sheer sadism behind this invention is enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. Even King Phalaris, who was notorious for his cruelty, was reportedly shocked by the brutality of the brazen bull. In a darkly ironic twist, he ultimately subjected the very creator of the bull, a sadistic inventor named Perilos, to his own deadly creation. Perilos was locked inside the bull, and a fire was lit beneath it, exposing him to the gruesome fate he had devised. But the tale takes another sinister turn. After a brief release, King Phalaris threw Perilos off a cliff, proving once again how indecisive and ruthless he was. Some accounts even suggest that King Phalaris himself met a fitting end, burned alive inside the same brazen bull he had commissioned, as part of an uprising against his reign. Here comes number 12, the horrifying fate of the Vestal Virgins. Our journey through the darkest punishments in history takes us to ancient Rome, where the Vestal Virgins held a sacred role as priestesses to Vesta, the goddess of home and hearth. These women served as not only religious symbols, but also as representatives of the city and its citizens. The dedication required for this role was unparalleled, as they were expected to make a lifetime commitment and uphold strict rules that came with it. One of the most stringent rules was that Vestal Virgins had to remain abstinent from sexual relations for their entire lives. This vow of celibacy was a crucial aspect of their role, symbolizing purity and protection for the city they represented. The Vestals served as guardians of Rome's spiritual well-being, and their chastity played a vital role in this duty. However, the consequences for breaking this sacred oath were dire. If a Vestal Virgin was found to have engaged in sexual activity, her punishment was execution, but not in the traditional sense. Due to the sacred and symbolic nature of the Vestals, taking their lives directly was considered an unholy act. Instead, a more gruesome fate awaited. The condemned Vestal was paraded through the city, her broken purity a symbol of disgrace. Eventually, she reached a small chamber near the Colline Gate. In this chamber, she was left with only a lamp and a small amount of food. Then, the chamber was sealed, and she was buried alive. The next is number 11.